The first thing I noticed that morning was the smell. Burnt rubber, gasoline, and something almost like arrogance. I stepped out of my front door, coffee in hand, blinking against the pale sunlight, and froze. There it was, my neighbor's son, the so-called king of the driveway, had parked his Audi R8 like he owned the neighborhood. And honestly, maybe he thought he did. The R8 gleamed in the early light, low, wide, perfect. Except it wasn't just parked. It was flaunting. Nose inches from the hedge. Wheels barely a hair's breadth from the curb, angled as if daring anyone to approach. I swear I heard the car hum with smugness. I frowned. I'd been living here long enough to know how these things went. HOA rules were HOA rules. You don't block the fire lane. You don't park across two spots. You don't. Well, apparently you could get away with being a teenage boy in a $200K car if your mom had a binder full of complaints and a badge-like sense of entitlement. I was halfway through my coffee when I heard the door behind me slam. Karen, HOA president, my neighbor, and human embodiment of a warning sign appeared like a storm cloud in pastel yoga pants. "Jason," she said, her voice syrupy sweet, but sharp as a scalpel. "I hope you're not planning to, complain about my son's parking." I swallowed, trying to keep my irritation in check. Well, technically, yes, it's a little over the line." She gave me the kind of look that made it clear technically was not an option. "Honey, he's learning responsibility. And anyway, it's just for today. Just for today." Those words always carry the weight of doom in HOA land. I nodded because arguing with Karen was like debating gravity. Pointless, futile, painful. I turned back toward my car, coffee gone lukewarm, and muttered under my breath, "Great, just great. Today I get to be the neighborhood traffic cop." As I tried to shake it off, I noticed something odd. Her son wasn't inside. Hadn't even moved a muscle. As if he knew the car itself could fend off any consequence. My gut tightened. There was something brewing here, and it had nothing to do with coffee. I had no idea that in a few hours that shiny, untouchable R8 would be the epicenter of a disaster I couldn't have imagined. The morning stretched on, and I tried to convince myself that Karen's son would eventually move the car. I paced in my living room, half listening to the hum of my neighbor's sprinklers, half dreading the inevitable confrontation. The R8 sat there shining like a jewel, its sleek curves mocking the rest of us plebeians. By mid-morning, the neighborhood had started stirring. Mail carriers tiptoed past the driveway like it was a minefield. Delivery drivers peeked cautiously over their steering wheels. Even Mrs. Patel from 3 houses down, usually armed with a sugar cookie and a judgmental stare, slowed her walk to scrutinize the car. And then, of course, there was the sound that made my blood run cold, tires crunching on gravel. Karen's voice perfectly pitched for maximum drama, yelling, "Jason, is he parked again?" I stepped outside, coffee cup now forgotten, and saw him 30-some. Hair gelled just enough to say, "I'm responsible," but still wearing that smug, slightly oblivious teenage expression rising from the driver's seat. He stretched, yawned, and waved vaguely at me like he hadn't just violated every ounce of neighborhood protocol. "Morning," he said. That single word felt like a challenge. "Beautiful day for a car, huh?" I forced a smile. "Yeah, stunning. Except, maybe a bit close to the hedge." He shrugged, leaning against the car. "Nah, it's fine. Mom said it's fine." And that's when the tension cracked. Karen appeared at the top of her steps, arms folded, eyes sharp enough to cut steel. "See, Jason, he knows what he's doing. There's nothing to worry about." I wanted to scream. Instead, I muttered something about fire lanes and HOA rules, hoping logic might penetrate their little bubble of entitlement. But logic, as I'd learned, has a short shelf life around Karens and their offspring. I turned back toward my house, resigning myself to a day of passive-aggressive glances and muttered complaints. Then, a sudden thunk echoed across the driveway. I froze. I glanced back. Nothing seemed different. The R8 was still perfect, but my stomach told me otherwise. Something had shifted. Something inevitable was coming. And that's when I heard it. A low, dreadful groan, metallic and wrong, like a scream caught in steel. I blinked, heart hammering, as a terrible thought settled in. This was no ordinary morning. This was the calm before a storm that would leave no one unshaken. The groan hit again, louder this time, and my stomach dropped like I was on a roller coaster I hadn't signed up for. I ran toward the driveway, heart hammering so loudly I was sure the entire block could hear it. And then I saw it. The R8, my neighbor's perfect little king of the driveway, had been attacked. Not by vandals, not by fate, but by the one thing I didn't expect, a delivery truck reversing down our narrow street. Its back bumper scraped against the R8's side, with a sound that still rings in my ears, a sickening symphony of crunching metal and shattering glass. The driver leapt out, eyes wide. Oh my God. I didn't see it. I stood frozen, half in disbelief, half in horror. The car's sleek side was now a warped sheet of aluminum. The paint scraped, the mirror dangling like a broken tooth. The boy, Karen's son, came running out of the house, phone in hand, hair now slightly disheveled, a mixture of panic and disbelief on his face. Mom, you've got to see this," he yelled, voice cracking. Karen stormed out, heels clicking against the driveway like war drums. She stopped a foot from the R8 and gasped, covering her mouth. "Oh no! Oh no! No! No!" Her son's phone slipped from his trembling hands. I didn't. You didn't." "What?" Karen's voice rose to a shrill crescendo, echoing down the street. "This is a disaster, a catastrophe." I wanted to help, to say something calming, but there was nothing to say. There was no way to fix the sight before me. The once pristine car was now a crumpled reminder of how quickly privilege and arrogance could meet reality. People started gathering, neighbors drawn like moths to the chaos. Mrs. Patel muttered, "Serves him right for parking like that." Others whispered, some sympathetic, some scandalized. I felt trapped in the center of a slow-motion explosion, watching the entire neighborhood's moral compass collide with steel and glass. Karen's face was pale, her hands shaking as she dialed some emergency number I assumed was for lawyers, insurance adjusters, and probably a personal PR consultant. Her son, usually untouchable in his bubble of entitlement, looked smaller than ever, staring at the car as if it had betrayed him personally. And in that moment, I realized this wasn't just about a car. It was about pride, power, and the sudden humbling force of consequences. Then Karen looked at me. Her eyes narrowed. "Jason, you saw this, didn't you?" A cold dread settled in my chest. That look said everything. The storm was far from over. The street felt different after the crash. Heavier, quieter, like the neighborhood itself was holding its breath. The R8 sat mangled, its polished curves now jagged and cruel. Karen hovered over it, phone pressed to her ear, her voice pitched somewhere between hysteria and litigation. Her son stood beside her, looking smaller than a child who's just lost his favorite toy. I leaned against my porch railing, coffee now long forgotten, trying to process the chaos. The neighbors had started murmuring amongst themselves. A chorus of shock, judgment, and secret satisfaction. Some offered quiet condolences. Others couldn't hide their smirks. It was a social experiment I hadn't volunteered for. Then Karen's eyes found me. "Jason, you witnessed this, right?" Her voice was tight, trembling just enough to make it sound like she was about to collapse or attack. Yeah, I admitted, my voice calm despite the tension. I saw the whole thing. Her jaw clenched. And you didn't. She stopped mid-sentence, caught between accusation and the realization that no words could rewrite the scene before her. Her son finally muttered, "I didn't even touch it." His voice cracked. It was the first trace of humility I had seen from him. He kept staring at the car, his reflection shattered across the crumpled panels. And for a moment, he looked human, vulnerable, defeated. The insurance adjuster arrived minutes later, clipboard in hand, a professional bubble of calm that only made Karen's panic worse. She rattled off facts, dates, and accusations faster than anyone could process, trying to bend reality with sheer willpower. Her son stood silently, probably counting the seconds until he could disappear back into his Instagram-perfect bubble. I stayed on the sidelines, taking it all in. It was surreal, watching someone's carefully curated world implode in real time. The lesson was brutal, visible in twisted metal and trembling hands. Arrogance and entitlement rarely survive contact with consequences. By the time the tow truck rolled up, Karen had moved from hysteria to strategy, barking instructions, making sure everyone knew whose fault it wasn't, hers or her son's. The boy lingered, staring at the R8 one last time, a mix of grief and shock etched on his face. I sipped my lukewarm coffee, letting out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The street had returned to its quiet rhythm, though the air still vibrated with tension. Lessons had been learned, reputations tested, and for once the king of the driveway was humbled. And as the tow truck hauled the wreck away, Karen muttered something under her breath. Half threat, half sorrow. I knew one thing for certain. When the deputy arrived 20 minutes later, I told him everything. He went into the shed, took one look at the box, and whistled. "Sir, you might have just walked into something much bigger than HOA drama." I raised an eyebrow. "Like what?" He pulled out a folder marked Community Financial Oversight Board. "This woman's been forging tax assessments." The deputy flipped through the manila folder, with a deep scowl settling into his brow. "This isn't just some Karen drama, sir. This looks like financial fraud on a county level." I leaned in slightly. How would Janice even get access to these documents? He pulled out a stamped sheet with a forged letterhead. Community Financial Oversight Board, but the logo looked like it had been photocopied a dozen times. "She made these. None of this is real. There's no such board in this region. These look like fake assessments she's been mailing to people, charging illegal HOA fines, and threatening liens if they didn't pay up." I blinked. "Wait, you're telling me she's been scamming the neighborhood?" "Looks that way," he muttered, slipping the folder into an evidence bag. "We've had reports in surrounding counties of a woman matching her description pulling similar stunts. She acts like she's reviving dead HOAs, then bullies folks into giving her money under threat of legal action. And the guy I saw, I asked, could be a co-conspirator. We'll run the plate when we get traffic cam footage. For now, stay alert." That night, Anna and I sat by the fireplace, replaying everything in our heads. The fake ID, the clipboard, the made-up violations. Janice had been parading around like a dictator of a forgotten kingdom. And people had believed her. "You know," Anna said, swirling her tea, "if she hadn't tried to come up here again, she probably would have gotten away with it." I nodded. "Yeah, and if you hadn't blocked her path, she might have gotten inside. Who knows what she'd have planted or claimed." We didn't sleep well that night, even with Janice behind bars for now. There was an eerie sense that her grip had reached further than we realized, and we were right. Over the next week, 4 other neighbors came forward. All of them had received mandatory maintenance invoices from Janice's so-called board. 2 had paid, one even forked over $900 to avoid property suspension, she threatened. Each of them had been too embarrassed to speak up until they heard about the arrest. Turns out Janice had collected thousands over the past year using this scheme. And it wasn't just our mountain stretch. She'd pulled this scam in 2 other rural communities before ours, always choosing isolated places where legal oversight was weak and residents were scattered. A few days later, the county prosecutor filed a multi-jurisdictional complaint. Fraud, impersonation of a public official, and criminal trespassing, just the start of it. Anna stood on the porch that evening watching the sun dip behind the pines. Funny, she said. She thought we were the problem. I wrapped my arm around her. Guess she never expected her own fake world to come crashing down from a simple blocked path. And just like that, the mountain was quiet again. 1 blocked driveway and 1 real arrest warrant. If you think Karen got what she deserved, smash that like button, drop a justice served in the comments, and subscribe for more stories where karma hits back hard. You don't want to miss the next twist.